Hello, everybody. I'm the president of the board, and I would like to welcome everybody to the 114th annual membership meeting of the Allen County Historical Society. So I used to ask years ago if there was anybody who attended the first meeting, but I don't think there's any point in that anymore. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. Would the board members, any who are here, please stand and be recognized? Thank you. All right, we have a very short business meeting. We have approval of the minutes of the 113th annual meeting. And is there a motion from a member of the museum to approve the minutes? The minutes were distributed on each chair.
I move that they be accepted.
Well, all right. Do we have a second?
A second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes of the 113th annual meeting signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you very much. This time I'd like to introduce Larry Hoffman, Chair of the Nominating Committee. Please come forward.
Are we going to do this in tandem?
Oh, no.
Okay. Just checking. Well, thank you, Bill. As usual, Bill lets everybody know right why we're here. And I don't know about you, this weather is so beautiful today. I can't think any place else I'd rather be, at least not for another hour. Even if you aren't a football fan, you know what I'm talking about. I have two items of business here that we need to cover, and we do every year. The first item of business is the election of members to our Board of Trustees of the Allen County Historical Society. Voting for trustees is limited for members. We welcome any guests here today and hope you become a member soon. But as we rule on these or vote on these members, if you're not a member currently, please refrain from voting, and certainly in opposition to any of them, refrain. But we do have a slate. We have currently 11 trustees who are come up for renewal or replacement every 3 years. And this year, the three trustees whose terms are up have agreed to run for another 3-year term. That would be Jim Osmond, Christine Pleva, and Bill Timmermeister, all three of whom are here. So if you don't know them, raise your hand and I'll tell them they have to stand up again. But they stood up earlier. Therefore, those are the only 3 nominations for those 3 trustee positions we have. Can I have a motion from someone other than those 3 to approve the slate as presented? Jeannie Ray, I have a motion from Jeannie Ray to approve that. Do I have a second? A second from Mark Billingsley. All in favor of accepting that slate, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Another unanimous vote. Thank you for that. I've been put to an extra test this year to see if I really know how to handle any real responsibility. You can thank Amy for that. But we have, this past year, we went over our Constitution, not so much with a fine-tooth comb, but certainly a rake. And we updated it in a few places, and most of these proposed changes to the Constitution are to get us up to date, kind of with current events and with current technology. notification that the Constitution, these changes were going to be proposed, was sent in the email notifying of this meeting, and copies of the changes to the Constitution are there for you to look at. If anyone has any questions about those changes in the Constitution, feel free to raise your hand. I'm going to go through them real quickly so that you know what they're about and know what you're voting for. And these are changes to the Constitution itself. Starts in Article 1. We merely updated the mission statement of the Allen County Historical Society, and there really isn't any substantive change to it there. We did change Section 5 in Article 2 regarding member notification of meetings and such. Used to say by mail. Now, instead of saying telephone, we'd say through social media or digital platforms. So that's the big change about notifying you all of things. Social media, I think, still includes email, which is only old people like me use, I guess. We did add something to Section 6, Article 2, that the annual meetings, such as we've had here, may be waived due to unforeseen circumstances, including a pandemic or natural disaster. I don't think we've canceled one yet, even during the pandemic. We were here last year and the year before, so it'll have to get worse than that before we cancel one, but thought we should put that possibility in there. The composition and terms of the Board of Trustees, this is probably the most substantive change in here. Our Constitution currently says that the board shall consist of 15 trustees. We've had a few deaths and a few resignations recently, and currently our board is at 11 trustees. We have, in discussing it quite a bit, we thought that holding ourselves to at 15 members is getting into a position where you get people on just because you got to have them. We did talk about the fact that there should be a minimum, and the change here says that there be a minimum of trustees of 9, no fewer than 9, no more than 15. The idea of a cap on it at 15, we still thought it's a good idea, but we don't want to be a slave to it and have to make sure we got all 15 lined up. So it gives us some leeway there. That's probably the most substantive change. They'll still be divided into 3-year terms and into 3 classes. In other words, so that a third of the trustees come up for election every 3 years. I know 2 of them will have 4 in them. Jim Osmond and Mr. Math Wizard would have reminded me of that when I sat down, so I just wanted to think of that, okay? In Article 3, Section 2, nomination of elected trustees has changed somewhat in that the slate of interested eligible candidates will be in writing at least 30 days prior to the annual meeting. That's why we sent out the notice for today earlier than we usually have. Also added to Section 10 in Article 3 is an appointed person will take minutes in our Board of Trustee meetings. Now, believe it or not, all this time that's never in there, and it was always assumed that the director would do it. Well, that's a lot to ask of a director, especially when you get him to come from a long way off to run our museum. And the fact of the matter is, I'll confess to you, Donna has been taking the minutes at meetings for a long time. So even though the Constitution says the director shall take minutes of the meeting, she can delegate that to someone, as long as it's Donna. Doesn't say that, but that's another change. Also added where there might be an emergency, or if the Board of Trustees needs to conduct some sort of business, that a vote can be put out and done digitally. Sometimes you just can't get them together when there's an emergency or something didn't get addressed. And Amy has been good about setting us and say, what do you think about this? We vote on it, and that works better, but we don't use that regularly. We removed the part about officers and furnishing certificates to members. Used to have little membership cards, and that's still in there, and we don't have that anymore. There's a lot of other ways to tell whether or not you're a member. Best way is if Donna says, oh yeah, they're a member. That when you come in the door, she'll know. In Section 7, believe it or not, our Constitution did not say that the where is it? Oh, yeah, any new, if we appoint any trustees until the next annual meeting, which frankly we did not this past year. Valera Orchard retired. Bob Torbett passed to his great reward, and we haven't appointed anyone yet, but Section 7 allows, with the assistance from the director, to approve a trustee replacement until the next annual meeting, in which we would put them up for election again. In Section 2 of Article 5, to promote and interpret the Allen County history, we've changed that part of it to promote the mission of the organization. I consider that kind of a style change, but Amy had a good reason for doing that, and I trust her. Section 6 says that the direct executive secretary, which is Amy, has to develop the annual budget, but she has to do it with the bookkeeper, Miss Donna, and with our treasurer. The last several years, the trustee member who has acted as treasurer is Jim Osmond. I know they did that here just recently, and the budget will be approved in the first quarter, no later than the February meeting, which means in a couple weeks when we get together, the budget for the coming year will be approved. What's in Section 7 there? Oh, yes, we have to have a motion for gifts of collectibles that come in have to be recommended by the collections committee prior to any such action. I think that was presumed for a long time, but it wasn't stated in there, and we have in the past year had regular meetings of the collection committee to look at all these changes. The committees themselves, we wanted to establish in the committee that there are standard standing committees. One is the executive committee, which of course is the president, vice president, and treasurer, a governance and nominating committee, finance, collections, personnel, development, and facilities and education. We consider those the primary standing committees. Any committee that we have, those mentioned included, has to have, of course, a minimum of 3. And that committee can compose a subcommittee, including of people that are not members. And the idea is that people in the community have something to contribute that aren't members. We could have one of those committees could have a subcommittee of 2 or 3 people who would recommend to the committee only. And if they're not members, they of course wouldn't be able to approve, vote on anything the committee was doing, but we don't want to shut out the possibility of an outside person who has something to offer. Section 5 makes the committee, defines the committee responsibilities more clearly, but in the end it's the same thing. Believe it or not, the finance committee, however, we did need to make an addition. Believe it or not, the finance committee did not say that an absolute member or a member of the finance committee must be the treasurer. And it does now with these changes. And of course, it makes clear that the finance committee, an additional duty is seeking ways to raise money for the society. There's additional changes with the collections committee that emphasize the collections committee can't take things in without inclusion or having the director address it first. And any actions regarding collections will have to have a final approval of the entire Board of Trustees through the recommendation of the Collections Committee. The Personnel Committee has to assist the Director Executive on matters relating to personnel policies and practices, employee relations, etc. The Personnel Committee can do that quicker than the entire board, and over the last couple of years we've had the entire board involved in a lot of things about personnel, specifically since some of the personnel were county employees. And the last year that's gone pretty smoothly with a tip of the spearhead headed by Jim Osmond, with Donna on one flank and Amy on the other. And the commissioners are much more malleable with those two going right at it. Any commissioners here, by the way? Okay, just checking. The Education Committee, which has consisted mostly of Sarah Risch the last several years, also is identified in here as a primary committee, and they're, under the Constitution now, committed to work more directly with the director about educational programs, et cetera. And the Education Committee reports to the Board of Trustees now, and actually, maybe it's because Sarah's so soft-spoken anyway, we never did hear much from her, but the Constitution now says the Education Committee will facilitate conversation with the board about its programs. And again, of course, she'll be doing that through the director. So that addition to the Constitution was designed to make education, reaching out to the schools with different programs that Sarah and Amy have come up with to show kids about the history of Allen County. That is all of the additions, changes, or removals we proposed to the Constitution, and they are, the changes are one little packet you have, and the other is the older Constitution. So you can review it at greater length if you wish. Hopefully you have now, and those of you, first of all, do I have someone to make a motion to approve changes as presented? And this time, Bill, Jim, or Christine can move if they so wish.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
So moved.
How about that, Bill Turnermeister? If that motion's been made and seconded, all in favor of accepting these changes to the Constitution as I've outlined them and as are in your handout, all in favor of that, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed to any of the changes? I'd say the ayes have it. Thank you very much. This is the most time Amy has ever given me to talk publicly to all of you. I hope it does not discourage you from returning next year to the 115th meeting. She should be embarrassed. Thank you very much. The next year is going to be even better than this past year. Bill, thank you, sir.
Do you want to go over them one more time? No. I'm glad. Thank you. At this time, I would like to welcome a special guest, Russ Decker. Russ, would you please join us at the podium?
So Bill, on behalf of Nutrien Lime and Nitrogen and our employees, we had an opportunity in December when Rotary had their annual charity auction to pick up an item that we immediately thought of the museum for. And that was, as most of you in this room know, that for the first time in over 100 years, both the Speaker of the State House and the President of the House Senate are from the same county, which is Allen County. And so we were able to get both Senate President Huffman and Speaker Cupp to sign a state flag that flew over the State House on November 8th. This was the first, not only was it a unique thing because they both signed it, but this was the first state flag that they signed jointly together. So we wanted to make sure that the museum had that.
Well, thank you. That's great. Let's have a hand. Thank you very much.
Can I say one more thing here?
Well, certainly.
And we have one more announcement we wanted to make today that Amy doesn't know about, so just wanted to surprise her a little bit. But we've been in talk with Amy for quite a while, along with the Lima Building Trades and some other folks. So we wanted to let Amy know today that the John Singer Sargent work that you wanted us to do is going to get done.
That's great news, and we want to thank you very much for the flag. It's a special item, and there's no better place to have it displayed than the Allen County Museum. Thank you. At this time, I want to turn the meeting over to Amy, our Executive Director.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Bill. And Russ, thank you so much. That's such great news, and I'm so grateful to you for helping put that together, because you actually helped bring the builders together with us, so we are ever grateful for that opportunity. Today, I would just like to remind people that if you look at the museum highlights from 2021, this year there's a lot of different things that we were able to accomplish as a staff and certainly with the help of the board. I am ever grateful to the board that I have here at the museum because they're active, they're engaged, and they're really dedicated. And I've been involved with museums for a long time, and I can honestly say that this board is one of the best boards that I've ever worked with. And so I take great pride in having the opportunity to work alongside of them because they support what we do, they support the staff, they move things along. And there's still always a lot of stuff that needs to get done at the museum, but at the end of the day, we're able to take baby steps to get some of those things done, and then we're able to take leaps and bounds to make other things happen. A few of the highlights, though, that I would like to also speak of. But before I do that, I'd like to also, any of the staff members that are here, I'm going to read everybody's name off because the museum works collectively, and it's because of the work of all of the people who are here. And I know that several of them are not here because I typically don't ask that they come, but I will read their names so people are familiar with the people who really get the stuff done here at the museum. Charles Bates, who is curator of transportation and trains, or rail. Brittany Venturella is director of curatorial affairs. Donna Collins. Donna, would you stand? So everyone knows you. She's bookkeeper and administrative assistant. Janet Harshman, who is not here. Patrick Dahill, who is our maintenance person and works really, really hard. Joanne Park is with us, but she has really been out due to some illness for the last few months, actually an extended period of time, but we miss her and keep her in our thoughts. Valerie Plaskett, Sarah Risch. Sarah is our curator of education. Marion Richardson. Marion is one of our interpreters, along with Valerie. Anna Selfridge, of course, many of you probably know Anna because she is the ultimate historian for Allen County, and she's been with the museum almost 40 years, I believe, at this point. Marianne Valentine. Marianne comes in. She's our weekend staff and also interpreter. Lisa Weaver is one of our educators and assists Sarah Risch. And that's everyone, I believe. Did I miss anyone? No. So anyway, I would just like to extend a huge thank you to our staffs and give them a round of applause because we are accomplished everything because of them. Just to share a few things, because then I want to really get into the program, because there's a lot of stuff happening today, and people want to get to other places as well as be here. So last year, our attendance was significantly low, as people can anticipate because of the pandemic. But we have been really happy to know that attendance ultimately went up about 75%. So we ended up with about 26,275 people who came through the museum. Some of that were people who were actually here for the Christmas Tree Festival, but that always ends up making up a lot of our attendance. But nonetheless, we're excited that we were able to even hold the Christmas Tree Festival, and through that event that happened over 5 days, we were able to bring in about 8,957 people. That attendance also includes 562 people 5,692 people who were here for general attendance, and 11,608 who came for educational programs. So that's really incredible when we're able to break it down and we can really see that impact that we make in the community. The other thing that has been really significant, and we've been really able to track really well, we've always tracked this, but I broke it down this year because I really wanted to see some of these hours. You know, the museum is able to do a lot of extra stuff and other things because we have so many wonderful volunteers. 3,189 hours were given by 43 docents in the education department last year. 487 hours were given by the curatorial department, 4 interns, and which consisted of basically 4 interns and 8 docents. In that program, what ended up happening is Brittany has trained several docents, about 8 of them, who are willing to come in and help and assist with adding information into the database for the collections, which is fantastic because it's an area that we can always get behind in, but we have been able to really move that forward, and that's going to continue in 2022. 10 hours were given by 32 volunteers for riding the rails, and while it seems like that's not many hours, by the time you put all that together, that's a huge event that comes together, mostly done by the board and also by Donna. 36 hours of on-site attendance was provided by 231 volunteers who assisted with the Christmas Tree Festival. So that's pretty impressive when we go back and we look at those numbers. So that really makes us really pleased. There's a few places that I'd also like to mention in regard to contributions and grants. The Ohio Humanities had presented us with 2 different grants last year. One was for $7,500 and another was for $16,000. Those grants, one was used for the John Singer Sargent. We will be able to have some of that area painted. We're going to reinstall the John Singer Sargent in a stairwell that's over and across the way from Anna's area. And then the other thing that they provided us was a general grant that is really unheard of because generally they do not do general operating, but because of the dynamics of the way that they got the money for some stuff related to the pandemic, we were able to receive general operating money. And so that was a fantastic thing that really helped us. The other big grant that we got, and this is going to carry over into this coming year, was a $50,000 grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is really fantastic. It was unexpected. I will tell you, we submitted it, and I just submitted it like, well, we're going to submit it and see what happens. And by golly, we got it. So it's exciting, and it's going to actually support our President's exhibit, which opens on June 24th. That exhibition is coming from a different organization, but it's going to allow us to actually hire an assistant curatorial person for Brittany to assist in the curatorial department. It also is going to provide us the opportunity to get different kinds of pedestals and stuff that we need just for exhibitions in general. And then we're also going to be able to put together a catalog, which is probably one of the first catalogs that we're doing that will consist of items that are in the exhibition, but also some of the objects that we're able to add to that exhibition. So I'm really excited about that. We'll have several people who are writing part of that curatorial exhibition piece. So we're excited about that, and that's something new for the museum. The other thing that I think is significant is the fact that the museum brought in 1,143 artifacts throughout the year. So those were all donations that were made from different people in the community. They were pieces that went through the collections committee, and that was the total number that we got this year. There were also 954 artifacts that were put into the database, of which 715 were new acquisitions for catalog records, which is pretty incredible and really good work. Some other things that are significant and new to what we're doing is the fact that we have been putting some things out there that are related to Throwback Thursdays online and ways to kind of drive people to visit the website and also just make ourselves more visible. And part of that came out of the pandemic and the fact that when we were closed, we were like, how are we going to let people know what we're doing? How are we going to let people know we haven't closed our doors? We're down for a little while. So long and short, that came together through Throwback Thursdays and the Mystery Artifact. One artifact, the post that ended up happening, reached 72,910 people, and it was the post that was related to Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig when they came to visit Lima. So that's a spectacular number. I couldn't even believe that when I got that information from the curatorial department. The other thing that is really spectacular is the other thing that we had to kind of figure out as the pandemic was happening is how are we going to figure out and reach people and provide activities when some people were not even coming to the museum. So 7,683 Take It and Make It crafts and activity sheets were provided and distributed to the community through the education department this year. So that's a really pretty incredible thing, and it certainly speaks to their tenacity and their dedication to making sure that people had access to things in the museum. We had several new programs, and some of those, one of which I wanted to mention because it was part of what helped us have the opportunity to stream some activities, which really was very new for us, and it's something we're hoping we're able to continue to do as 2022 comes through. Because again, we're not sure where some of the pandemic will take us, and ultimately we're excited to see such a large crowd here today. But we were able to hold National Fossil Day. That was the first time we ever did that. Ann Decker, who is one of our board members as well, was kind enough to be willing to stream that for us. That was the first time that happened, and we're hoping that we will be able to continue some of that activity. She also has recorded things and made those accessible through YouTube. The other new thing that we did was a printmaking workshop for the first time, and that was really to tie into this exhibition, which was ultimately has been up and will go through. We extended it through April, but it was a great way to kind of tie these two pieces together. The work that could be done through a printmaking class, and that was a family-oriented event. Not a ton of people came, but the fact that we were able to organize it and actually reach some people, and we ended up actually getting a docent out of that that project. So that's really, really a great thing as well. And I would say the last thing, we had several docents who have given many, many hours to the museum. And one of the people who received a special recognition during the docent luncheon was Cheryl Quay. She received her 10-year award for volunteering more than 500 hours. So, you know, when we add to the other volunteer hours that I reported earlier, and there's all these additional things that happen with people who give all this time and energy to the museum, and again, it speaks to the fact that the staff alone couldn't do all of the work that we're able to accomplish, and it really is due to the volunteers, some of whom are docents, but others who come in and just volunteer as well. So we are really fortunate that is the case for us. And with that, I think those are the main highlights that I wanted to speak to today. The rest of the information, of course, you can read, and that's available on the sheet that has been provided for today. Speaking of volunteers, I'm going to turn over and talk a little bit about our guest speaker. So Mark Billingsley has been a wonderful person for me to have the opportunity to get to know since I've been at the museum. He is one of our docents and a volunteer. He came to the museum and has been with us, I think he started in 2013. But when I came to the museum, Mark and two other docents were working on the Noah's Ark exhibit. And so I got to know them pretty intimately because of that. And that at that time, that event was, or that project was actually supported by Nutrien. It was not known as Nutrien at that time, but nonetheless, Mark went out and found that money to make sure that we could do something to refurbish the Noah's Ark. So he's been really involved with different things. He's an electrician by trade. It's been wonderful to have him because there have been many times that we've needed some of his expertise. And long and short, he has had a real interest in some of the stuff related to Ben Farote. And so today, we are excited to be able to welcome him, and he is going to do a presentation on Benjamin Carl Farote, talk about his life, all of the stuff related to him. He's just been, he said, you know, he had like a stack of stuff that he was able to find, of course through Anna, that he had to sort through, but he's just been fascinated by Benjamin Farote. And of course, Benjamin Farote is, for everyone, most probably associated first with oil, but then secondly with the Lima Opera House. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Mark Billingsley.
Thank you, Amy. Can everybody hear me all right? No? Can everybody hear me? Okay, all right. Go ahead, Amy. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit today. Go ahead.
Turn the lights down a little bit.
Yeah. I want to talk today about Benjamin Carl Farote, Lima's visionary businessman and entrepreneur. I consider him the forgotten businessman of Lima and Allen County. By the time we get done with this presentation, I think you'll understand why I consider him as such. If I can get this thing working right, we'll be okay.
Is that working?
No. I think I've had this trouble. Okay, all right. Well, here, Amy, if you want to keep us with this and see if you can figure it out. Okay, I want to also say thanks to Anna Selfridge for sticking me into this deep hole of information that we have here at the museum on different people, not just Benjamin Froat. Like Amy said, there's a stack of files that deep, and the first newspaper clipping is from 1859 that docents before us had taken the information and decided, hey, we need to save this, you know, for future generations. And without them thinking about that, and that's what our docents do now. We keep clippings so future generations will know what's going on with Lima and also with Allen County. But next one, if you're ready. So there's a picture of Mr. Froat. He was 5'5" and weighed about 125 pounds. A very feisty man. He had his own thoughts, and if you didn't like him, he really didn't care. But he would like to hear your opinion, and then he was going to do what he wanted to do anyway. But speaking of that, he was a very generous man. Most of the women in town loved him just because if they needed money for a charitable event, they would just go see Ben and he'd say, how much you want? And he would give them the money without any notoriety or anything in the paper or anything. He was very generous with people. A couple things he didn't like idlers, drunkards, or Democrats. And he was very adamant about all three, okay? And we'll get to more of that later. Go ahead, Amy. Benjamin Froat was born in upstate New York on October 13th, 1829. His father was French, his mother was German. And at the age of 7, Ben quit school, figured he learned enough. But his father had him quit because his father thought 7 years old was a good time for a young man to start making a life of himself. So it's just amazing quitting at 7 years old and then everything he did. The family relocated to Marion, Ohio, where Ben met and married Miss Helen Wells in 1852. They had 3 daughters together. We'll talk about them a little bit later. The family again relocated to Hardin County, and Ben worked as a teamster hauling stone. He had his own company. Well, at that time there was a discussion whether the railroad was going to come through Kenton or through Lima. And Ben knew whatever town it came through, that was the town that was going to start growing. So in 1859, Ben, his wife, and his brother, and that's all I know about the brother, okay, they moved to Lima. And go ahead. And then he left Kenton because there was no railroad that was going through there, and it went through Lima. He knew that there would be a big boom in whatever town had that. So since it came to Lima, that's where Ben was going. He opened his first business. It was a livery on Elizabeth Street between Market and Spring, across from the old YMCA, that lot there. I read another article where it was on the south side of Spring Street, and it gave the address of 203 Spring Street. That was, it's an open lot there. He must have made a lot of money. He received a contract with the U.S. government to provide mules and horses during the Civil War. That was a very lucrative job for him. Go ahead. In 1865, Mr. Froat incorporated the National Deposit Bank with $100,000 of his own money. When he did a business, he didn't borrow any money. He didn't ask for people to join except one time here when he purchased the Lima Mills. He provided his own cash for that. In 1869, Mr. Froat, T.T. Mitchell, S.K. Holland, and G.G. Hackadorn purchased the Lima Mills, paper mills. Within a year, the Lima paper mill was the largest employer in the city of Lima. In 1870, Mr. Froat bought out his partners. I don't know if because they didn't get along or if one of them was a Republican. I don't know. But he also bought his Froat farm. Go ahead. This is Oak Hill. This is a house that he built for his daughter, which stood where Froat Elementary School used to be. But before it was Froat Elementary, it was called Oak Hill. That building got tore down to build Froat Elementary, which got tore down to build Rulers. And you can see here the family sitting in the horse and the children behind it. Go ahead. Okay, in 1875, the Lima paper mill started producing straw boards. Straw boards kind of like our cardboard. It was a new packing thing that was item going. Mr. Froat held patent rights to the straw board. Very intelligent man. It paid. You needed 7 tons of straw, 10 barrels of lime, and 50 barrels of water to make 50 tons of straw board. All this stuff was piled into big drums, 16 foot in diameter, and was spun for 24 hours to break down the straw to get everything. And then it would slowly drain out. They would get rid of the outside casing of the straws, and then they would start running it through rollers, gapped different, and heated, and that would squeeze it and make it smaller and smaller and smaller until they got the direction, the diameter they wanted it. So all the residual stuff, all the lime, all the water, all that stuff went into Hog Creek, all right? So that caused a problem. But what Mr. Froat would do, he would contract with people to sell straw all the way from the Pacific Northwest. He would buy straw all year round. When it was done here in Lime and Allen County, then he would start buying it from people all the way to the West Coast, so he always had a supply of straw. He would, there were times where 40 rail cars full of straw would come into Lima from Oregon and Washington. The first of many indictments the city of Lima was filed on the mill and Mr. Froat for fouling Hog Creek. It goes on and on. It goes on after he sold the business, and it's unbelievable. Well, he hired Mr. Calvin Bryce. Some of you might remember that name, with a senator in front of it. He was Mr. Froat's lawyer. This is the first time that these two guys had met, and it was the first straw that got broken between these two gentlemen. The first thing Mr. Froat did was give Mr. Bryce money for a new suit because he didn't want his lawyer looking like Mr. Bryce showed up. So that kind of, started it. Okay, now here's the difference. Calvin Bryce eventually owned the National Bank, the gas company, Lake Erie and Western Railroad, and Mr. Froat, Allen County Bank, the electric plant, Columbus, Lima, and Saginaw Railroad. Calvin Bryce was a Democrat, and Mr. Froat was a Republican. So there's 4 things that didn't go well. Go ahead. This is a picture of the straw board factory. It was a large operation. On this property is where the oil well will be drilled later on. Go ahead, Amy. And here's a really nice picture of the paper mills. You can, up at the top, you can see some smoke up there. That's the railroad coming across, and then on the left side, that's the railroad coming in. They shipped everything over there. You really can't tell what all these are, but right above the paper mills, you'll see these big drums. That's where they mixed everything. And up on the next picture over are the rollers that divided everything down. I wish I could give you a better picture of that, but that's what it is. Go ahead. And this is another picture of the building over here on the left side is the office building, and that's where they worked. You can see on the left, on the right side, that's Hog Creek, okay? And Mr. Froat eventually dammed Hog Creek up so he could get more water. He also bought water off McCullough Lake when he needed it, which is now Schoonover. Go ahead. And here's some gentlemen that, it probably wasn't payday, they don't look too happy, but here's some gentlemen that worked at the paper mill. One thing about Mr. Froat, if somebody got hurt at the paper mill, he took care of them. If you lost an arm or a leg, hey, sorry, but you need to come back to work. And he always found something for you to do. He was always taking care of his people. He had a doctor who was there, doctors who were there 24 hours a day in case somebody got hurt. They didn't take him to the hospital. They took him back to their house, and the doctor would go and take care of him. Okay. In 1877, the mill started making white line paper, of which Mr. Froat owned the patent rights. What that was, it was a thin sheet of white paper that was adhered to a thinner sheet of straw board, and it was used for packing. It was more gentler, softer on your products. And the paper was sold the white line paper was sold in Europe, Australia, and other countries. In 1878, Mr. Froat purchased the Lima Street Railway. It ran from Cole Street east to the railroad on the other side of Main Street, and from Wayne Street down to Hog Creek. The carriage house for this, or the barn for this, was located on the southwest corner of Cole and Market Street across from the Presbyterian Church. There's an open lot there now. Go ahead. In 1879, Lima Paper Mills opened factories in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Kansas City, Missouri. Lima couldn't keep up with the demand of the products. And Mr. Froat became the first president of the American Straw Board Association. When he went to New York, he would dine with Rockefeller, Carnegie, all the rich multimillionaires. Mr. Froat at that time had a lot of money and people knew him. He was also on the first board of the Woodlawn Cemetery. His mother was the second person buried there. And in 1880, the mill was enlarged and employed over 150 men and 30 to 40 teams. The teams were a wagon, a mule, and a driver. They would go out to the country, load a ton of straw in there, bring it back in. So they were quite busy with this. And he was instrumental in bringing the Erie Railroad shops to Lima. They were trying to decide whether they were going to be in Wapak or whether they were going to be in Lima. Mr. Froat was the first one to donate money to get them to come to Lima. Okay. In 1881, the city of Lima and the mill were at it again, arguing over the pollution of Hog Creek. Well, it's funny, the city never brought an injunction that I can find against the Quilna Brewery, C.H. Miller Slaughterhouse, and H.E. Shutt rendering establishments, which dumped their stuff into Hog Creek. I don't know if they picked on Mr. Froat. I shouldn't say picked on, but yeah, I don't know if they picked on Mr. Froat because he had money to pay for the fines, but there was never a conviction. He never had to pay any money out. It's just, and after he sold the business, they just kept doing it. But it was terrible. You dump all the line in there, and I read one place where Hog Creek, for 10 miles out past Froat's business, everything was dead. There was no vegetation growing. There was dried lime along the side, no fish in there, and the farmers were complaining because of the water. I can't understand that. Go ahead. This is the Froat Opera House. It was one of the, at the time, it was the best opera house between New York and Chicago. Mr. Froat spent $230,000 to $250,000 of his own money to build this. There was 1.5 million bricks used, and there were 10 tons of window weights. And if you all, that's on the side of this thing. And the gentleman who oversaw this counted every brick and every piece of things, everything that came into here. This over here on the left side where you see the tall part, that's where the Froat Opera House was. It would seat 1,200 people. They could evacuate that building in 2 minutes, which was a big seller at the time because of all the doors and people want to know, okay, if we get trapped in here, how long is it going to get out? On the right side, which is Main Street, if you look up at the top, there's another one. That was the Lima Music Hall. That was on the 3rd floor. That sat 1,000 people. If you go back to the Froat display back here, the original organ that played in the Lima Music House is sitting over there. It looks pretty small for 1,000 people sitting in there. This down here below eventually became Kresge's a long time ago. Bill probably remembers that, early 1900s. And the other buildings up there were law offices, banks, other stores. There were dentists up there and everything. And that's what took care of the 2nd floor. The 3rd floor, that big 3rd floor, was where the music hall, the Froat Music Hall was. Go ahead. Now, this is the curtain, the look of the curtain for the Opera House. What's different about this, Mr. Harvey from Cincinnati painted this, and he painted 16 more backdrops for the Froat Opera House. This was based on a story written about a chariot race in 82 BC at the Circus Maximus, okay? And as you can see, there's a gentleman up front on white horses. He's winning. And then over there, there's a Roman gladiator in the black with the black horses. That ring a bell to anybody? I mean, 3 years after this, there was a gentleman who wrote a book called Ben-Hur. And he described this exact scene. And then we all know later on, who was it? Cecil B. DeMille made a movie. So they, in my opinion, because I haven't heard anything different, this is where they got that scene from, which is kind of neat because, it's from Allen County. I mean, come on, And if you go back to the Froat exhibit, there is a model of it, and we've dropped the curtain down, this curtain down, so you can see what it looks like. Okay. In 1882, Mr. Froat built a half-mile private racetrack next to McDonald, close to the Oak Hall house. But the reason he built it was because drunks, idlers, and Democrats hung out at the one that the county, that Lima had. And he wanted a faster one. He had like the best horse anybody had, and he could outrun anybody. But the neat thing about this racetrack is in the middle of it was a small woods. And they would have picnics there. People would come and have picnics. They would have dramas there and fireworks and everything. And it was a place for people in Lima to gather, no matter how rich, no matter how poor. They even had baseball games there. The Lima baseball team won the state championship one year playing on a field inside this racetrack. So it was pretty nice. And Mr. Froat designed and donated the first park in Lima. It was located on the southwest corner of Elm and Cole Street, and went to Lakewood Avenue, which was not there at that time, but that's how far south he went. He also financed and built the Froat Opera House and a hotel in 1882. And in same year, Mr. Froat leased 400 acres of his farm to the Lima Cannery. So the Lima Cannery took, in 1885, they raised 145 acres of peas, 30 acres of beans, 250 acres of corn. And 4 women worked in the cannery, 400 women, 50 men and boys worked in the field. These items were canned, put on railroad cars, and sent out to California and places out west. At that time, they needed fruit and vegetables. But what they did was they asked the surrounding area to plant their crops 3 weeks after the cannery planted their crop, because they could harvest their crop in 3 weeks, and then the farmers would bring in theirs, sell it to the cannery, and it would keep on going. They could make produce. It helped the farmers out, it helped the cannery out, it helped Lima out. Yeah. And this is some people here at the cannery. You'll notice the little boys down here, they're in the windows and everything. And I don't have a date, but it says Ben Froat, so that's why it's in here. Go ahead. In 1884, Mr. Froat started the Egg Case Company. What they did, they took straw board thin and sliced it and would interlace it so they could put eggs in these little shapes here. Women worked there mostly. They worked day and night. If the girls went to school during the day, they would work at night. They consumed 40,000 pounds of straw a day. So not only did he need straw for the straw board, he needed straw for the egg case. Producing 15,000 sets of egg case fillers, enough for 5.4 million eggs each day. They made their own machines, their own cutting machines, nailing machines and everything. They were shipped all over the world, and Mr. Froat, once again, patent rights. Go ahead. Also in 1884, Mr. Froat contracted with the Thompson Houston Electric Light Company of Baltimore, Maryland to erect a power station in Lima. The power station was behind the Froat Hotel and across the alley and behind the Froat Opera House. The power plant was the third electric station built in Ohio. This plant was located south of North Street between Elizabeth Street and the alley. It was behind where, is it Spherion? They're building there. It was right behind there. There's still a big open lot. The power plant later became a dance hall and a parlor. The Thompson Houston Electric Company are still in business. I checked them on the internet. They're still there. And they also built the first electric power station for a guy named Edison. So, you know, they had some experience. When Mr. Froat had the Opera House built, he had it wired for electricity. That was 3 years before he put the power plant in, because he knew electricity was going to be the next thing. Go ahead. This is just a picture. You can see here where the lines here on the side and the trolley down there. One of them's positive, the other one's negative. When the scraper comes down, it goes down, turns a DC motor, which turns the wheel. I know that's a little quick. The other poles is getting ready to put power lines in so they could drop them into businesses. Okay. In 1885, Mr. Froat decided he would drill for gas after Finley gas well was so successful. When the Finley drilled for gas, when that lit off, you could see the sky was almost daylight all the way to Columbus Grove. It took them a long time to get it shut off. So he thought, hey, you know, I need gas to run my stuff. And so they discovered gas, but the oil, there was so much oil, the gas could not rise through the oil to come out. So he just had an oil well, you know. Well, they thought that'd be a pretty good idea. Then his friend, J.D. Rockefeller, came to town and brought Solar Refinery. So along with Solar Refinery, well, we had three other ones, refineries locate. One was further out in the southwest towards Wapak more. One of the other ones is where the granary is now at the end of Cole Street and Grand Avenue. That's where the Eagle Refinery used to be. It shut down after 3 years because some more farmers west of town were complaining because everything was dead in the creek and the water was all tainted. But when you discover oil like this, you bring all these other businesses into town. You bring piping companies, you bring mechanical, barrel making, along with the manpower that comes in. And Lima grew within about 3 months. Lima added another 2,000 people into Lima and Allen County just to work on the refineries. Plus you had to have, you know, more food, more housing. I mean, more businesses just kept cropping up because of the oil. And go ahead. On July 4th, 1885, 5,000 people witnessed the first electrified Lima streetcar rolling through the square. It had to be a big deal. But what was the next big deal is that Mr. Froat had a 185-foot tower built next to the gazebo in the square, and on the top of it, he had 6 arc lights. Now, an arc light is carbon fibers that go, or carbon rods that go this way, and you have a negative and positive charge, and they arc across each other, and that's what lights up. It lit up the whole town, and he would turn it on special occasions, you know, because those carbon tips would burn out pretty quick, and you'd have to climb back up that tower, and you'd have to put those in there. I don't know how they built that thing. There's pictures showing guy wires going clear all through the town to hold that thing up. And in 1886, Mr. Froat closed his plants and took his 200 employees and their families on a chartered train to see the Columbus exhibition. Now, that cost him a little money there, but he also paid his employees for the whole day, which I thought, you know, it just kind of shows that he was concerned about the people who worked for him and also concerned about Lima. Go ahead. In 1887, Mr. Froat built a nitroglycerin plant on the north side of his farm. That's located on the corner of Woodlawn and Lakewood, excuse me. So those houses there on the south side of Lakewood, they probably have a lot of cinders underneath them, you know, in the yard and stuff. But that's why it was there. As far as I know, it never blew up. Mr. Froat incorporated the Columbus-Lima Northwestern Railroad. It would later become the Columbus-Lima-Milwaukee Railroad. The railroad never made it past Bryan, Ohio. The reason he was building this railroad is he wanted to get coal from West Virginia, put it on a train, and eventually go up to Milwaukee and put it on ships and ship it out. Well, it never got past Bryan because Bryan would not let them put an X on their rail line. And I don't know why, but there was a gentleman named Bryce owned part of that railroad up in Bryan. So I don't know. I don't know. It later became an interurban line because they had to abandon it. And so that's why it was not allowed to go through Bryan, Ohio. Okay. In 1889, Mr. Froat sold the Lima paper mill and the egg case company to the American Straw Board Company for $600,000. The American Straw Board Company was buying up all the straw board factories at the time. That's equivalent to $15 million today. What amazes me about that price, he built the Froat Opera House, he discovered oil, he did all this other stuff before he got $15 million. So he was making money, but he was also spending it here for Lima, Ohio and the residents. Now, the bad thing, in March 1890, Mr. Froat acquired 2.9 million acre land concession from the Mexican government to build a railroad to colonize the Paloma area. That was a very fertile area. It ran out of New Mexico and ran for 400 miles. What got me though is they were going to get $14,000 a mile to put this railroad in. That's unheard of. And he was also supposed to bring Mormons from Utah to come down and settle the area because the Mexicans said they didn't have anybody who could farm it. So that didn't work out real good. His backers consisted of the governors of New York and California, as well as the senators from Texas and New Mexico. Mr. Froat sunk all his capital in this endeavor. His friends told him not to do this because he was like the low man on the totem pole. So the money he made for selling the straw board company didn't go into his bank. It went into a New York bank to be invested. Okay, go ahead. Well, this is the bad part. Mr. George Ford, the National Bank Examiner, arrived in Lima to check out the Allen County Bank's records. Mr. Froat honestly believed that somebody turned on him and tipped him off that there wasn't enough money in there, which was right. They had $300,000 out in loans and only had less than $200,000 in the bank. So he wasn't covering everything, and which, you know, that's probably why they would check on your bank. So in 1892, there was a run on the banks in Lima, and it was all the banks, not just Froat's bank. And 1895, Mrs. Froat, their daughter Carrie, Lily's husband died, and in 97, Lily's 3 sons died of tuberculosis. So the 90s was a bad year for Mr. Froat. He did everything he could to start a new business to earn money to pay back his friends from Lima who lost money when the banks closed. He was adamant he wanted to pay those people back, and it just never happened. Everything he tried, people didn't trust him anymore. They wouldn't loan him money. They didn't want to be involved with him anymore. Okay. Okay, so in 1891, the bank foreclosed on Mr. Froat's farm, his railroad, streetcar, the railway, and the electric power station. The only thing he had left was his home on West Market Street. That home eventually became the Lima Club and the Milano Club. Okay, so if you go to the Milano Club now, and in their entryway, you can see all these newspaper clippings and pictures of Froat's house. He lost everything he worked for his whole life, and Benjamin Carl Froat died in Sandusky, Ohio, September 4th, 1904. But Benjamin Froat wasn't done yet. Go ahead. In 1904, the Lima Locomotive and Machine Company took an option on 260 acres of Froat's farm. The Lima Board of Trade at that same time bought 15 acres of the Lima Car Works, which was located on South Main Street, across the river. So they needed to get money. They needed $2 million, the Locomotive Machine Company did. Where they were located at the time was on the corner of Jackson and East Market Street. They ran out of room. They were building shays and they were building steam locomotives. They needed more room. So they took the option out on the Lima City Car Works, or Lima Car Works, and what they decided to do, they're going to sell lots for houses on Froat's farm. It became the Conderman, which was closer to McDonald, and then Park, and then Lakewood, which is closer to Woodlawn. They divided it into 5 different categories, and anybody could purchase a spot, but the cheapest ones by McDonald Street were $50. If you wanted a lot, it cost you $50. You paid your $50, wrote your name on a piece of paper, they threw it in a box. Then they moved down a little ways, a couple blocks. Okay, now it costs $100, okay, because we're getting further away from town, out in the country. And so that cost $100, the same thing. And then eventually the houses by Cole Street and towards the end, towards the west, that was $300 a lot. But if you only paid the $50 when it was time, they pulled, okay, lot number 1, Joe, you're lot number 1. Didn't care where Joe wanted his house. He had lot number 1, okay? And it kept going that way until they filled up most of the lots. And then, but when it got to the big money lots, they pulled your name out and say, which lot would you like? And the first lot sold was southwest corner of Cole and Elm Street. Second one was the next house, and all the way down to Lakewood. Then they came back and went down that way. So you had the choice of where you actually wanted to have your home. So they sold all that and then sold the city of Lima the remaining acreage for, which is now Froat Park, for $15,000. Froat Park was dedicated by Miss Carrie Froat Park, his granddaughter, Miss Carrie Froat Baxter, on July 4th, 1907. It was 22 years to the date that people in Lima saw the first electric car go through Lima, electric streetcar go through Lima. Okay. Now we're going to review here real quick. These are the things that Mr. Froat did for Lima and Allen County. Of course, he did it for himself too, but without him doing it, who knows? He had delivery on Spring Street, the National Deposit Bank. He purchased Lima Paper Mills, bought the 700-acre farm, helped found Woodlawn Cemetery, purchased the Lima Street Railway, opened mills in Philadelphia and Kansas City, helped bring the Erie Railroad shop to Lima, built the Froat Opera House and the Froat Hotel, rented out 400 acres to the cannery, built the first electric power station in Lima, struck oil in the strawboard factory lot. He also drilled a water well 200 feet deep and ended up selling water to Lima. Electrified the Lima Street Railway, built a nitroglycerin factory, and all we have to remember his name now is the street and the park. Next one, please. That's Benjamin Froat. Thank you. No questions? If you have any questions, I'll be happy to lie about it or whatever, you know, but, oh, good, nobody raised their hands. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Great presentation.
I would just like to thank everyone for coming today. We had a nice show of people. Mark, that was absolutely spectacular, and I learned a lot myself. Do any of you have questions? All right. Well, thank you again for coming, and I will say that we'll see you again next year.